Hi, in this video I will show you the new material presets, and then I will jump and show you the new way to generate detail with like stitches, buttons, zippers, etc. So this is how it looks without all the detailing. Let's go to the materials first. Okay, so to get the materials, you first go to Gumroad, download the zip file, unzip somewhere on your drive. Then in the garment tool preferences, tell it where you unzipped the presets. Then you should see the presets and you can load them like that, or you can use the asset browser. So you should see them in here. Now the difference between asset browser and the panel on the right is that from the asset browser, you can replace only one material at a time. But if you use the asset browser, you can select one object and all the checkboard material was replaced everywhere. If you have multiple materials on the objects, just select the one you want to replace and click append. Okay, so the one thing I do not like about the asset browser is that will create a bunch of duplicates in the shader. So for example, we are using this fabric shader 1, 2, 3. Each time you drop the new copy, it will create a new copy in the node group inside the shader. Not cool, and I do not have control over it. So that's why I prefer to use the panel from garment tool, since I can do everything in here. So let's load the jack denim material, and it is looking flat. It is because these materials, most of them expect the curvature mask. You can go to the stitches at curvature mode, and you see now without the curvature, with curvature. Okay, and let's maybe switch the material to this one and go over the settings of the shader. So they are built the same way. You have the UV, then there is the UV scale, then there is the texture itself. It is colorized with color ramp, so this way you can colorize it. Then it is going to this fabric shader. So let's see the texture. This is quite flat, but after fabric shader, it is receiving a bit of detail. Also, the bump map is generated in here. And finally, we have the principal shader. And let's jump to this node, what it is doing. We have three parameters sections: depth, detail overlay, and curvature overlay. Let's jump to maybe curvature. This is what is generated from the modifier. You can change the brightness, contrast. Then you can colorize like the black parts, make them red, white part, make them yellow. And to see the effect, you can connect the colored curvature. This is how it looks. Now we see some texture on top. Why it is here? Well, the idea was that if you imagine curvature being like the water, and it kind of makes sense that the water would fill the deepest places depending on the depth texture. So if you have some depth texture, the deepest places would be filled with water with the curvature mask. This is kind of the logic. So thanks to that, we do not have this flat looking, CG looking curvature, but you can add some texture with this like kind of logic using depth texture. Okay, so about the other settings, the depth texture is not only for colorization of curvature, but also it has some bump mapping on top. So let's see the bump map. And we are using this color texture to drive bump map. Does not look good. In some cases it works okay, in this case it does not work. This is not good for the bump. So the way around that was to use the detail texture. This standard technique, and you can increase this override, depth override, and use the detail texture. Make it smaller, darker. And the default detail texture is built into the shader, so you don't have to like download extra texture. You can use this one always. Or if you want, you can replace and use custom texture node, and then you would plug in custom node with different texture in here. And the detail texture also can be overlaid on top of diffuse. So it can add bump map, it can be overlaid on top of diffuse, and this way we receive some detail and this does not look so flat. Let's compare this to like pure diffuse. It will be kind of flat looking. And let's jump to this color ramp. You can colorize texture with this color ramp, but sometimes this is replaced with different node. I will load the material in here, and you see this is the diffuse texture. Then it is going to this color replacer node, and it is still red, but we can change now the color like that. And the way it works, it is just sampling color from the diffuse texture and then replacing this reddish color with the blue. In this case, actually, I have tolerance set to 100, so it is basically replacing the whole color. So if I set this to black and reduce tolerance, only the darkest parts would be replaced. Or I can sample white color, and now only the white colors get replaced. More interesting case is this one. So we have this diffuse texture, then it is going through the color replacer. And we are sampling the dark blue and replacing this with any color you want. And the way to use it is to just load the texture to the texture editor. Then you can sample, for example, a red color. And you see the red color is replaced with yellow. And if you want, you can repeat this. So I can duplicate, sample, for example, blacks, and make them like pinkish, like that. So I think that covers most of the settings on the materials. Now I will jump to the panel Finalize Stitches. What this does is adding the Solidify modifier, the stitches, and you are basically done. Now let's go over the setup. So I will remove the modifiers, and you would want to simulate the saving patterns, and then in the garment tool, press the finalize to bake the cloth seam into the mesh. This will result in the shape key with the cloth seam simulation baked into the second shape key. You can remove that if you want and continue working with this baked version, but I actually like to have the shape keys. And note that we have the saving edges still there. Okay, so you then add the Solidify stitches, and let's go about how those are used and what settings they have. I have the simple version of the Solidify. This is the Blender version and the garment tool. The difference, let's see the difference between them. But first, this is the mesh. It's kind of like two saving patterns with the saving edges. So the Blender Solidify seems to work okay, but it won't stitch together those saving edges. The garment tool version is welding together the gap. So this is one advantage. If I add the subdivision, then you see we get this ugly looking behavior on the stitch edges. Let's compare this to the garment tool version. You'll see there is no issue with the saving edges. Another thing, the corners can be creased with the Blender version with the rim crease slider, but the issue with that is that it is subdividing not only creasing this border, but also every loop in here. If I apply the modifiers, you see, and this is causing ugly highlights visible. This kind of give slightly worse highlights on the border, and there is no such issue with the garment tool version. If I apply, you see the creases only on the corners. And let's go maybe about the other improvements. So we have option to add the loop rims. So this is adding extra loops around this direction. There is control over pushing this inside or outside, like so. And thanks to these loops, we can get rid of the gap between the saving patterns. So without it, you see that the subdivision is pulling those two meshes apart. And I can fix that gap by adding rim loop. Finally, the garment tool has the option to bump up the borders of the saving patterns. So I can bump this up like so, bit much. And this simulates kind of when the two cloth patterns touch together. You can smooth this result by increasing inflate range to get like smoother look. Lastly, if you press those three dots in here, then you can move your mouse over island and press, for example, 2 to set thickness to 20%, press 7 to set thickness to 70% of this value. And last part for the Solidify is the welding. I can show you this the best on example on the back. I do not want this to be here. I can press the weld icon, and now we see the saving patterns. This is for the neck area. So I want to weld this edge with this. So I can press tab. This will be now welded. Press tab here. And now those two edges, red edges, are welded, as you can see. And that covers the Solidify part. Let's jump to the stitches. By default, there will be spawn on outline with single stitch type. You can add some offset from the border. You can change the size. You can change the radius, pull them outside, change the spacing. The spacing is the most important, since this is also affecting not only spacing but the size. And lastly, trim ends. Now, I could use the trim ends to fix the gap in the back, but this is affecting all other stitches. So instead, I will undo, click the three dots, and I can control scroll to adjust the savings trim per each edge, per each curve, per each end. So this is now fixed. The other button in here, for example, you can use that. Move your mouse to the edge, press tab. This will disable stitch. I can disable stitch, for example, in here or in here. Or if I press shift tab, it will toggle our other stitches on the island. And yes, that covers, I think. Also, there is the border offset. So I can border control scroll to offset individual stitches like so. Let's go over different positions where you can spawn the stitches. So we are spawning on the outline. I will call this single. Let's spawn one more stitch, but this time I want to use the on attribute. And the idea is I want to stitch in here. So I will select edge and add attribute. Let's add the slice like that. I would probably have to better model the garment with, I could slice them in the curve mode, but I did not. So let's add the attribute, assign, and you see this stitches attribute is now assigned to this edge. I can enable modifiers, and you see this stitch attribute is used to generate stitch. And the last method is to use the curve guide. So in here, I will snap cursor to selected and add curve. In edit mode, I will move this up, and I can add stitches. They are a bit smaller, so I will bump up the spacing. So remember, spacing is not only increasing spacing, but the size. And I will switch to the use curve and pick the curve, and that's it. So those are the 3 type of modes you can use to spawn stitches. Let's go about the different stitch types. So this is the center stitch, single stitch. I can change this to double stitch, change this width. I can enable use round corners, but I do not like this. So I will disable use round corners and manually set this per curve using this button. So move your mouse to the stitch, press S to toggle one end for start, E to change the end. And now this looks better. And lastly, there is also the cross stitch. So I will name this double, add one more, and it will automatically use the last settings. So we are spawning on the edge, switch the double stitch to cross, increase spacing like that, maybe reduce the width, and I can use trim to trim those. One more stitch type is the custom object. You can pick an object you want. The button is built in. You can push this, make this bigger, push this outside, change the size like so. And last type is the form array. This is useful for zippers. And okay, let's reduce the trim. Then I can push this out slightly. The way it works, you have to put in the root object, the tip object, and then the duplicate array object in here. I can show you them. It's quite simple. This is the tip object, root, and the one that will be duplicated. It is important to orient them in the Y direction. So this will be duplicated in the Y axis. And that is it. Let's go maybe and add a bit more stitches. I can name this zipper and add one more. And this time I want to add a double stitch in here. So let's, I could copy the double stitch settings, paste. Now it is driving the same stitch in this place. So instead of using the edge from here, I want to spawn this in here. Now I could add the stitch attribute like that, assign, and what you see now it is spawning also the zipper. So instead I will remove this attribute from the edge in here and create a new one. I will name this AAA, and we switch this stitch attribute name to AAA. Now we have the double stitch. I will enable round endings, maybe change the width, and this is how you can quickly create some details like that. So I can assign AAA attribute, etc. So lastly, we have the stitches done, but we want to maybe add some indent effect to the cloth. So you just press add indent, and you see a small difference, but now the mesh is pushed inside. I can change the depth of the indent. I can change the range of the effect to give slightly smoother result. But one issue is that now the mesh is pushed in and the stitches are floating. So I will copy the depth value and push inside the stitch like that. Actually, not the zipper. I want to push in the double stitch, so I can push in also the single stitch. So yes, I think you get the idea. on the workflow. This is a bit much. Let's reduce this. And when you are done, you could assign some materials to this. So for example, go to the library, select some preset, and now this is looking a bit flat. It is because the mesh has no curvature mode. So let's add curvature. Looks better. And I want different material on the sleeves. So I will select the three parts in here, add new slot. Right now it has no material, but I will select like the jeans preset or something different and click append the material. So it will fill the slot with different kind of material. And that's it. One thing about those zippers and array deform type of preset is I use this not for zipper but for this red border, and I forgot the name, but the idea is in here I use this red mesh and it is instance in this direction on the outline. Now, why this is not split into separate edges? Because there is this threshold angle which is quite high. If I reduce this threshold angle, you see we have now created split. The lower the threshold angle, the more the splits they are. So I just set this to high value, then it will generate round connected cyclic curve on the outline. And then you can try to export the mesh. Now, if you use Blender apply modifiers, it won't give you a good result. It will remove the stitches. Also, if you try to use convert to mesh, also it will remove the stitches. So I created this apply stitches. This will correctly, one more second, apply stitches, and then those stitches are baked into instances that could be exported or manually edited. So I think that covers everything I wanted to show. See ya.